Let's do this thing. Hi, how are we doing? It's morning. You're doing splendid. That's fantastic. Hey, my name's Lemon, and this is my first time. There we go. Yeah, my first time in Oslo. Really excited to be here. This is I've only been in this city for a day. I really like it, and I hope to explore more. I'm from Minneapolis. Here's the only fact you need to know about Minneapolis. Our per capita of adult to brewery is about 1 to 5,000. So for every adult, there are 5,000 breweries in Minneapolis. I'm just saying, I don't know what the Minneapolis Tourism Board is talking about. That's what I would be talking about if I were from Minneapolis Tourism Board. Yeah, my name is Lemon, and I make websites. I'm assuming that that's something that I have in common with a lot of you. But I'm going to talk to you for a minute about what the process is when I'm making a website. So it depends. It depends on what I'm working on, but usually I'll write in Pug. If you've never heard of it before, Pug is sort of a pre-compiler HTML language. I like it. It's nice. I do a lot of work in Sass. I just find Sass easier than CSS raw in a lot of cases. There's, you can do variables now in CSS, which is cool, but Sass is nice. I write in Vue. If I'm doing JavaScript-y kind of stuff, that is usually my choice. Personally, I prefer Vue to the other ones. I prefer it. That's all that matters. I prefer it. That's as far as I'll go with that. But then sometimes I use Ember because I like Ember too. I learned Ember before Vue, and it's better in a lot of ways for particular cases. So sometimes I will end up writing in Ember. Also, a lot of times I'm working in Microsoft.NET stocks. That's not usually my choice, but if that's what the project calls for, if that's what the backend guys tell me that we need, then yes, absolutely. Let's work in C#. Let's do that thing again if the project calls for it. If it doesn't call for it, if I'm maybe doing something a little bit more quicker and client-facing, then I'm probably going to be using PHP. Again, PHP in some sort of CMS concept is what I like to do. Now, sometimes if I'm writing in CSS, then I try to use Bourbon, which is a little like CSS mixing thing. So when I'm writing CSS, I'm thinking about bourbon, or sometimes I'm thinking about beer, or depending on how the project is going, sometimes I'm thinking about gin. But all of these languages, except for the two funny ones, really they boil down into two things, and those are three things. Three things. I know how to count. Three things. Those three things are HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and that's an unavoidable concept that we never should lose sight of, is that no matter how cool and awesome and different and unique your technology is, you're always going back to the same place. You're always doing HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Unless you're Craigslist. Actually, no, Craigslist does have CSS. But we're going to talk about only one of those things, and that's CSS. Because you went to the talk with CSS in the title. Congratulations. And we're going to bring you CSS here. So here's a thought that some people have, and okay, that's inaccurate. CSS is not easy. There's CSS, as Dave Rupert pointed out, CSS is basically the memorization of several thousand key value pairs. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not easy, but CSS is great. And I really do think so. I really do think CSS is great. I really think that there's a lot of times when I get real janky code and I can just improve that thing with CSS. We're going to talk about a little bit of that. Now, when you're thinking of CSS, you might be thinking about this, right? And I know, as somebody that likes CSS, I know that this is mentally where a lot of your brains go. I understand. And I'm not saying I don't even understand the perspective behind this thing. It's valid, right? So a quick straw poll, how many of you actually do sort of think that this is true? Like how many of you think this actual GIF is what comes to your mind in CSS? Oh, that's a lot. Oh, if you're watching this at home, that was everybody. How many of you genuinely would say that you hate CSS? Oh, not that many. Okay, that's cool. That's okay. That's okay. If you hate CSS, I understand where you're coming from, and I understand the position of vulnerability. I'm going to comfort you. Because we're going to go from this to this. This is what I think about when I think about CSS. This is a GIF, by the way, made by Lynn Fisher. Okay. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about 3 things. We're first going to start off with things that are weird. Yes, CSS is weird. CSS can be weird. We're going to start off with the things that are weird. We're going to go into the things that are great. There are things that are great in CSS. And then we're going to close on things that you can try now. All right? So let's get weird. It's hocus pocus by focus. All right. So number 1 thing that is weird is overflow. And what's overflow and how does that make things weird? Well, we're going to go back to another image that I know that you've seen before, which is this one. Okay? I know. You've seen this before. I understand. But here's the thing. I can make this in CSS, all right? So I'm going to go box border, basically 1 EM, which is basically the size of an M. Then we've got a width of 4 Ms, and the padding of 0.3 Ms, and our HTML is obviously that. And then there we come to there. Now you'll note that that's not exactly 100% this, right? Our O is a little bit further over into the line, but we're basically there. We basically made that image. Okay, so now we've got this, right? Now we've made a meme. Congratulations. Wait for all those Reddit likes to come in, or upvotes. But we've made a meme, but let's figure out what we can do with it, okay? So if we take this and we just add a single line to that, okay, of overflow hidden, now we end up here. Okay, now that's not great. We don't love that, right? That's not where we want to go. Okay, fine. We can still work with this. So we're going to go overflow Y hidden. Now, I've been saying overflow Y hidden. You're then saying implicitly that by overflow Y hidden, I mean overflow X auto. So that means that up down is going to be hidden, and left right is going to be scrollable. Okay, so now we end up with this. Now, okay, no, that's not what we want either. I understand. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, word break word. You can do this. Okay, so now that's weird syntax, by the way. There's a couple things in CSS that do look like that, that's just like some sort of Greek tragedy. Okay, so now we ended up here. I mean, that's better. I feel like that's the best version of this that we've had so far. I will say it's not great. I recognize that it's not great. Text overflow ellipsis. We can do this as well. This is a really good thing to do if, for example, you've got some sort of a really wide table, some table heads that don't fix, even table cells that don't fix. You can do text overflow ellipsis, saying like if this thing goes wider than it needs to, ellipsis that thing out, and then you can change it then on hover. And then we end up with this. CSS is okay. So we're going to look at the structure of our original thing. And we're going to look at that and figure out how we can actually fix this. And the thing is that if I'm looking at this, I've only got 3 properties. I've got my border, I've got my padding, just to, slam exactly against the border, and then I've got my width. Here's the thing. Why did I expressly talk about the width? Like, why did I do that in the first place? And also, what world did I expect them to rectify that with? I said an explicit width, and then the text went outside of it. Yeah, I made 2 rules that were contrary to each other and I ended with that. If I just simply remove the width, then I end up here. And I do think it is. Okay, we're going to go into positioning. Another weird thing, right? Okay, so who wants to tell me which is the initial starting position? So if I write a div and I don't give it a position, who wants to tell me which of these properties that div has? Yes. Static. Oh, yeah, that was totally a trick question. You've got a couple of different properties. All of them are useful. And then position static exists. we're going to go through a couple of these. Okay, so position absolute is basically you're pinning something to its nearest controlling container. So in a lot of cases, that's going to be the body itself. So in this case, we're pinned to the body, which means we can scroll up and down. If you had a position relative with a position absolute inside of it, then that position absolute becomes relative or becomes absolute to its relative container. If we do position fixed, now we're not pinning anything relative to anything else. We're just pinning it to the screen itself. So I'm going to scroll, and no matter what. So if you want to just ruin somebody's day with a modal, and God knows I'm asked to do that lots of times. Position fixed is how you end up doing that thing. We got position sticky. Now this is a sort of new property. It used to be that you had to do this in JavaScript. And then for a while, there was still enough edge cases where you actually had to do this in JavaScript. You no longer really have to. And it's a neat thing, because you can just take this. All right, so we've got our relatively positioned element, but then once we actually get to the top, it'll just stick and scroll. And so you can do that for, and again, no JavaScript here. This is CSS. And so you can do this to a lot of cases. You can pin things to footers. You can pin things to headers. You can pin things relatively to each other. It's useful. Now we got position relative. It's a div. Yeah, look at that div. Oh, it's moving up and down like a div does. Then you got position static. Oh, that was moving up and down like a div does. Yeah, I wrote that example. We've got all 5 together. We can kind of just see how those things work. But then we want to think about the contrast between all of those. So our fixed is stapled to a position on your screen. Fixed is about your screen, not about anything else in your actual DOM. Your absolute is stapled to a position nearest to the restrictive parent. It also takes it out of the flow. So if you had 14 elements and you took one of those paragraphs and made that paragraph position absolute, it now is no longer in the DOM. The space that it would have created no longer creates that space, but it's still going to be positioned where it is until you start giving it top, left, right, down attributes. Sticky, our newish toggle thing, fun to play with. Relative, just follows page flow. That's the div you're the most familiar with. And then static is the same, it's just that it's not helpful, ever. So a couple comparisons now. If you're having a thing, if you've ever had a thing where you went z-index 5, z-index 9, z-index 1,000,000, z-index 9999999, this is probably the reason why. You probably were in a static DOM element, at which point it's not actually going to respond to z-index. It's also not going to respond to top, bottom, left, right. And it's not going to hold an absolute. So if you've got a sticky div with an absolute inside of it, the absolute is going to break out of the sticky. Or sorry, static, not sticky. So why does position static exist? Well, it does, right? That's one of the things that we have in web coding in general, is that once things exist and once things actually have the momentum, then they continue to exist. Now, it doesn't have to. You could do this. I'm going to say everything in the top of my style sheet, position relative. And I do this, I do another version of this, which is box sizing, which is that if you're calculating a box, by default, the calculation's idiotic, because CSS says that the calculation of a box is the thing, but I'm not going to include the border, and I'm not going to include the padding. That's dumb. I overwrite that rule. I don't overwrite this rule simply because this could create problems. You could have a situation where, for example, if you were pulling in some sort of library from somewhere, you're pulling in some CSS that you did not write, you might have the situation of, for example, your sticky that's holding an absolute child, and that's going to knock that thing out. That's going to break that thing. So I don't do this. And I don't necessarily recommend that you do. If you want to, that's totally fine. I get it. But instead of this, let your first step, if you're having a problem with a div, just do that first. Just do, well, okay, I don't know exactly what's going on. Position relative, that's going to actually probably fix the problem. I wrote a CodePen article called Z-index is weird, if you're interested. Hey, let's talk about, that's not, okay, again, words bring up images in my mind, right? So if I look at things, if I look at float, that's actually not what I think of. Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of float. That's what float looks like to me. All right. So what's float and why does it suck so bad? Well, everyone's been using float wrong all the time. So that would have been a way better talk title. Everyone's been using things wrong all the time. Okay, so here's float when it works. This is the only reason why in 2019 you actually want to write float. And that's because you're writing an article and you're having a bit of text and you're wrapping that text around that article. So this, in the HTML, is going to look like IMG, paragraph, paragraph, and then our wrap makes sense. Cool. And this is, again, if you're not doing that layout, you don't use float. Just don't use float. Exceptions, but don't. So that's float when it works. So what about float when it doesn't work? That's what float looks like when it doesn't work. Now this is the same thing. We had our image. Any Bob Burgers fan in here? My daughter's a big fan. We've got our image. We've got our single paragraph. And then after our float, everything breaks. Everything just blows up and makes everyone really sad. So, okay, why is because float creates this this layout paradigm where you're saying, okay, so here's my div, and then usually divs just go like this, except for now I'm saying like float, and then that's going to just accept things next to it. That's why we ended up here in float. That's why float is problematic in a lot of cases. Now, can you fix it? Yes, of course. Of course we can fix it. Of course we can fix it. This piece of code. Now, I was talking to Amy at one point, and she said that this piece of code is not anywhere in her CSS. And I don't think I believe her. I don't think I actually believe you. I feel like anytime you've got anything that's using float, you're seeing some variant of this. And this is all in every sort of grid system, Bootstrap, whatever you have. What you're doing is you're creating essentially a table that exists in the Twilight Zone, right? And you're saying, for that table itself, I want you to clear both properties. And you're doing that at the end of something that holds the float. So if we do that, and we just throw that back in here, that's what happens, right? So the float's fixed because basically right here, you've got a table you can't see that just clears out your float and fixes your layout. So we're there. So now that we're really good at floats and we like floats and they are really the best, cool, let's just make an entire layout with floats. God knows other people have done that. So here we go. Here's our layout that you're always expecting to see on the internet, which is 6 pictures of William T. Riker, which quotes from William T. Riker. Standard web stuff, right? Okay, so here's our simple grid system, a card layout, something you've seen before. We're going to make our own layout with floats. Easy to do. So we're going to say that a single Riker, we're going to float that thing left. We're going to give it a width of, and calc is very useful. And calc works in everything. Calc even works in IE. I know. Calc actually does work in IE. It's a computer program that can do math. I have to say that I was impressed at one point to learn that Internet Explorer could do math. I was just like, oh, it's like when you're a little kid and this kid says goggy and you know he means doggy, but it's like, well, that's pretty good. So we've got our calculated width here of 33%. Actually, that should be 33.3333 recursive. 33% minus 30 pixels, and that reason for the 30 pixels is that we're giving it a margin left and a margin right of the 15 pixels. Okay, cool. Hey, that. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, ship it to prod. Like, I think we're pretty good. I got other stuff to do. You don't need to get in the middle of my art. We got a lot of problems here. And we've got ways to fix all these things in our specific float layout, ways to fix lots of these things. But we have lots of fixes that we have to do If you do inspect element on Bootstrap stuff, a lot of fixes in there, a lot of workarounds. But I've got hope for you. I've got a lot of hope for you. And the first piece of hope is coming from Grid. Lots of people in my general front-end kind of world are talking about Grid. And there's a reason, is that, boy, it makes some of our stuff very easy to do. So I'm going to run through a little bit of Grid examples for you. So we're going to look at our Riker layout, right? We're going to look at our Riker layout, and we're going to try to do that in Grid. Okay, so what we're going to do with that is we're going to say, okay, all Rikers is going to be a grid. Our columns, I want to have 3 columns of 1 equal a fraction, a unit, which I'll get to in a second, and a gap. So that's step 1, defining our Rikers. And then step 2, we're done. Like, that's literally it. I'm done with my layout. And you know what I like to do? Check Twitter. And so if I can finish my layout in a couple seconds, then I get more time to do that stuff. And in fact, this actual thing, when I was like, well, I want to make an example of a grid that we're going to do, I did that in Grid because that's the fastest way. That's faster than Illustrator. And it's also 288 bytes. Yeah, web performance. So we're going to go through, and a lot of our magic here in Grid is going to be in this Grid template columns. Now, there's a bunch of ways to write this, and these are all valid. So we can say 1FR, 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 which again, we're going to get to the FR in just a second, but that's basically saying I want 3 columns that are the same size. We can also do repeat 1FR, and that is the same thing as above, but that's just a cleaner way to write it. We're going to do 3 columns. The first one, 260 pixels. The second one, 50%. And the third one, you're saying, well, whatever's left, go ahead and give me that. We can also do repeat autofill 260 pixels. Now, you can actually do a responsive layout without ever writing breakpoint math by doing this. So you can say either, I want you to take and fill the space with however many 260 pixel boxes as you can, and it'll do that. That second to last thing will do that. Or you can say, hey, I've got this container, and I want you to throw in as many boxes as will fit, basically around 160, which is also a very cool thing to write, because that, if you start to do explicit math, you then have to do that in a whole bunch of different CSS breakpoints. You can just do that in Grid with a single line. And of course, that's Grid template columns. There's a Grid template rows as well. It also is there, also is the same thing. So that's interesting here. So 1FR is a fraction. That's what that FR stands for. That was a unit of measurement that came along with the Grid spec. When you're thinking about fractions, you might think, as I usually do, about gin and tonic. So this is my gin and tonic. I'm not saying that it's the best gin and tonic in the world. I'm not saying that I'm an expert at gin and tonic. I'm saying that when I make a gin and tonic, what it looks like is I use 4 ice cubes. I use 1 jigger of gin. I put however many tonic water makes sense. Sometimes I use a bigger glass, sometimes I use a smaller glass. And then I got a lime wheel. So I've got 4 different things of unequal measurement. And that's how Grid works, because from that instruction, I can end up with this, or I can end up with this. Now, sometimes if I go to a bar and I get the little small one, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I meant a big boy drink, but oh, you gave me this little shot glass. Thanks a bunch. So we're going to look at some of these columns here. So first of all, we've got our Grid template columns of the 1FR. I'm done with the Rikers now because all that talk of gin and tonic is making me thirsty. So let's look at this. So this is our Grid template columns. We're saying 1FR, 1FR, and that's creating 2 boxes of equal size. Now, this, again, is going to be responsive by default, right? So I can take this and stretch that in, and that's just going to stay with 50 by 50. Cool. I mean, cool, but like, not amazing. I get it. Not amazing. I gotcha. Okay. We're going to go for 1FR, make a slightly better grid. And that's just going to say, okay, great, here you go. Here's all your drinks. Better, that looks better. But again, you're not amazed. I don't blame you. That's not amazing. That's not amazing. I'm going to get there. We're going to say grid template columns 200 pixels and 1 FR because I've got some different drinks in here. Some of them are in taller glasses and some of them are in squatter glasses. Okay, so cool, we're going to do that. And then we're going to run into this situation. Now this is start to be how you would define, for example, like sidebar stuff, or like I've got like one piece of content that's more important, I'm going to blow that thing out. I could go 1 FR, 3 FR, 1 FR. To just hold that big thing, or a specific measurement. Neat, okay, fun. All right, we're gonna go grid template columns, repeat autofill 240 pixels. Now again, this is our situation where we're creating that responsive grid in the way that I just described, right? So our 240 pixel box is going to continue to exist on the page in as far as, oh, it's actually scaling, oh, my browser. Well, okay, you're going to have to trust me because it's in the iframe. I'm not going to do that. Believe me when I say that, that the piece in the iframe there is actually going to scale out. Once I don't have 480 pixels available, it's going to knock down to just the 2, just the 1, whatever. Then I can go autofill min-max 250 pixel 1 FR in order to create a piece of measurement where I'm saying, well, at the minimum, 250 pixels, but if you can get more than that, as much as you like, that starts to fill in that. This is also a fun thing to do with grid. Good, we're making a grid, we're making a grid in grid, which I would hope that CSS Grid can do grid. Okay, but we can get even fancier, okay? And we're gonna get even fancier. So let's look at our grid here, and we're going to say that in our grid, repeat 4 at 1 FR. We've already seen that. But then we're going to say, if I'm feeling like I like rum drinks are good for me, then I'm going to say, okay, so for every mojito or daiquiri or pina colada, I want you to take that and have that be 2 columns and 2 rows. So now in the parent, we're saying, okay, so 4 equal measurements and forever. And then we're saying our rum drinks, I want that thing to be twice as big. So now if we do that, well now we've actually got a kind of fun layout. And again, this is not, nothing here is called out. This is a whole bunch of divs that are the only thing distinct about them is what class they are. And we can then create some sort of fun grid concepts. That's neat, but we can actually get better. So we're gonna look here at some HTML. And again, this is what each of these pieces of HTML looks like. We got our figure, and we've got our pina colada, our screwdriver, our mojito, blah, 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 blah. But now what we want to do is we actually want to take this and sort it by glass, right? Plenty of ways to do this in JavaScript, of course. But what I'm going to say here is we've got our figure with all of our glasses. Cool, great. But what I actually want to do is I'm going to take this, and this is CSS here. I'm going to say everything in a Collins glass, order that first. Everything in a martini glass, order that second. Everything in a tulip glass, order that third. Everything in a margarita, order that last. And if I do that, I actually end up with this. No matter what happens in the actual DOM order, in the HTML order, I end up with this because CSS Grid just takes and reorders that thing like that. Now, not only is that cool, but that has a whole bunch of repercussions because now you can take stuff where if you've got a layout and then it's like one of those things where the designer goes like, yes, well, here's my very artistic creation. You go, cool, what does it look like on a phone? Oh, crap. I did not think a whole bunch of this, just a bunch of this. That's what it looks like on a phone. You can take that order thing and just throw that thing differently placed. You have ads that maybe need to go in a different place. You've got entire structures that need to get dropped or moved around. You can do all that stuff with a single line, order. Now that means that you're starting off with a default of order 0. So if you start to order stuff, just keep in mind that the stuff that doesn't get the explicit order probably going to need some sort of instruction. Now that's CSS Grid, but if you want more of that, you should come to Amy Kaepernick's talk. She's from Perth. She's lovely, and she's got an entire talk about CSS Grid, including, are you doing subgrid stuff? Yeah! Oh my God. Amy's going to be talking about CSS that like just came out like 2 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago. I'm so sorry. That's in this room today at 1500. Yeah, do that. Because we're not going to keep going on grid because there's also, oh, yeah. Before we do that. Yeah. It's fine, actually. It's fine. It's not bad, right? So if we actually look at our can I use in grid, okay, yes, of course. If you're supporting IE 9, then you can't use CSS Grid. And if you're supporting IE 9, then I know why all of your front-end designers are quitting. I can tell your boss. I can tell your boss why that's happening. That person's doing a lot of code for browsers that do not matter. But at the point that you get away from that, okay, now you're talking about basically just prefix problems, right? So if we can do this grid in IE 10 or 11, and basically what we need to do is we just need to do some prefix stuff, which is fine. If you write Sash, you can kind of do that automatically anyway. You're probably going to need to ignore a couple little really fancy grid properties, but that's okay. You'd want to do grid. Okay, so now you get into BlackBerry browser. Yeah, of course, that's a problem. Opera Mini, that box is always red. But you know, like not fully there. Okay, so, but then we actually look at that thing in a different case. So this is now in bar graphs by use. And that Safari line, that iOS Safari line is insane. Also, fun fact, did you know that if you're using another browser in Safari, or if you got your iPhone and you're using another browser, you aren't? Yeah, that's true. No matter what browser you're using, if you're using an iPhone, you're actually using Safari. It might have a different logo, but that's part of the license that Apple provides. But yeah, so now if we actually look at real use cases, this is okay. This is a US use case we're looking at right there, but global is almost the same thing. 90.5 versus 89.7. So our takeaways from this is if you need to target IE 10 and 11, no problem. The support's basically there. Your IE 9, yeah. And then any other CSS Grid failings are basically about when you've got a browser that's about 1.5 years old that hasn't had new spec stuff. That's really where your failure is. Now you can use Flex, and I don't have the time here to do a talk on Flex, but Flex is also very cool. The Flex is a situation where you're doing that last use case where you're saying like, I want to think about 160 pixels, and you can just tell that to a computer and go like, you figure it out. And it does. And it does the right job like half of the time. That's pretty cool. If you want Flex support, you've got it. Like if you're actually trying to get Flex in your project, again, IE 9. But if you actually want to get Flex in your project, you can do that thing. You can use Flex as a fallback if you actually need to. So we're going to talk a little bit here about Flex just for a second, because we've got our Riker grid. Talked about that. Okay, so now what we're doing here is we're saying, here's our container. I want you to go display Flex. I want you to go Flex wrap, meaning that you can just keep doing columns. If you don't do that, it just tries to fit it in one single row. Then you're saying to any available space, I want that to be space in between. We're going to use our calc again for actual Riker to say 33%. I don't know why I didn't, just I guess for clarity, I didn't put in the 33.3. And then we're going to say flex grow and flex shrink. Now there's actually the super fun magic of that, because you can say, I've got a container, and then in my container, I've got these boxes of an equal measure, and they've all got measurements, except for in those containers, for each element, you can say like, well, that one I care about. That one is 200 pixels. And I mean it, it's 200 pixels. And then that one's around a quarter of the screen, whatever. That's a fun power of Flex. And the other thing is that Flex can be used with or instead of Grid. Flex came first, Grid came a little bit after. People got really excited about Grid. which makes sense, but these things can actually be used together. And the most impressive thing about Flex is that I can do this. Now, if you don't write CSS, you might not know exactly what that means, but what that means is, I love Bjork. I love Bjork. Bjork is a personal hero of mine. I wish that I could be more like Bjork. So we've got our grid here, and this is just a bunch of photos of Bjork. But in this case, we're saying, well, okay, I got an explicit height that I want you to set. But then, as far as the actual picture, as far as the actual orientation, you figure it out. I'm going to say space in between, and you just kind of figure out that grid, and it does it. Vertical centering. Oh, yeah. The thing that one of your front-end guys said, oh, it's actually not a thing you can do. Yeah, you can actually do that, and that person has been able to do that for like 6 years. Vertical centering is possible with Flex, and really, really short. We go Flex container, Flex, we would say align item center, and then we say justify content center. That's now we've got both our vertical and our horizontal centering. And then no matter what our size is, that is a centered element in the start. Neat, and also short. Not complicated to write. I like that part a lot. So I want to talk about CSS and JavaScript for just a second, but in order to do that, I wanted to do some research. And so a lot of times when I cite stuff, I want to make sure that I give credit. But I'm not going to credit the author of this, because when I look at 9 CSS and JS libraries you should know, that's not actually what I think the typography should look like. I think the typography should probably look a lot more like this. Hey, I have 9 CSS and JS. I'm sorry, do you consider yourself employable? The 9 different things that all do the same thing, and you should know them. If you've got cases personally where the CSS and JavaScript works for you, hey, I'm not going to say I approve, but I salute. I hope that thing works out for you. And that's okay, but the thing is that if you're using JavaScript as your CSS architecture in order to fix problems, then maybe the problem is really just in the cascade, right? CSS is cascading style sheets. That first letter is the cascade. And that's what makes a lot of this stuff matter. When somebody explained to me that one specific Webpack library was like, oh, it scopes your CSS. It's like, well, you do that by just writing CSS. What are you talking about? Okay, so the cascade, slightly complicated. Okay, so here's the cascade. It's got individual rules of increasing specificity, calculated in order, with IDs getting extreme priority, only be by inline styles, and important being the nuclear option. So essentially, the cascade says, I'm going to read every style that you write, and I'm going to read it top to bottom, which means that if you've got 2 styles that are matched, the rule that happens later wins. Then you've also got a matter of increasing specificity. So if I've got a style that says A, and then I've got a style that says div, or every A inside of a div, well, that one wins, because now that's more specific. When you start to get to IDs, that's when it gets more specific. So now if I've got a thing with 4, a section with a figure inside of it, with an A, with a span, but then I've got an ID, that ID is going to win. So now if I get into IDs, now the way that I can beat that is I can go, well, important, and then getting into the inline style. So that's the cascade, and it takes a second to wrap your head around. There's a scoring system where like this thing gets 1 point and this thing gets 100 points. I don't think that's super helpful. I think it's helpful to just look at situations like this. So here's our HTML. We've got P1 with an ID my paragraph. And then we've got this, okay? So this is now competing styles. We've got background colors, we've got foreground colors. Okay, what's the background color of our paragraph? Green? Okay. Orange? What's the foreground color of our paragraph? Now, our paragraph is we've got our ID, our hashtag myParagraph. That means that's an ID. That thing's going to win. Unless a bang important shows up, that color red is going to win. So if we look at that, we end up with some competing styles that look like that. Now, here's the thing. What I think makes the most sense is when you're looking at the Cascade and you're a little bit confused at, well, why is this color? Yeah, that makes sense. That's a question that you'll find yourself asking with some regularity. Why is this the color? Your best friend here is actually just your browser. I'm going to take a quick sec to just say Firefox Developer Edition. If you haven't tried Firefox since the Quantum update, do it. Like, just do it. I'm not saying, yes, switch browsers. Do whatever you want to with a browser, but try Firefox now. It's real good. Like, it's very fast, and it's got some like really cool inspecty stuff. All that grid stuff, Firefox does some really cool grid inspectors. But anyway, if we look at our paragraph, right, then we can actually just see, I'm going to switch this over to the right side. Okay, so now we can actually just see where these rules came from. So we can see that it's got a foreground color of red, our background color of orange, and then in all of those things that lost, you can actually look at that and see exactly why they lost. You hover over that thing, and yeah, live demos never work. If you hover over that thing, it's going to tell you exactly why that thing lost out. I can do that same thing with our A, and just keep dialing in. So at the point that the Cascade's not working out right, yeah, that'll totally happen. But if you bring that thing into your browser, you can figure out what that problem is most of the time, for real. I said I was going to leave you with some stuff that you can handle right now. And this one, when you're talking about the Cascade, is really, really good. And it's actually fun. I'm gonna open this up for just a second here. So this is a fairly simple, almost iPhone-style game. But basically what you've got is, I've got 32 levels, and I need to select something. So in this particular case, what I'm looking to select is, I want to select the apple on the plate. Well, okay. So if I go plate and apple, shit. Oh, come on. Oh, I just need to hit enter. And so this way, you're actually just doing levels after levels of, because I don't want to get the pickle that's on the white plate, I want to get it on the blue rim plate. And so you can just keep doing this thing. So if I go, okay, so now I need to get a plate that is fancy, and I want to get the pickle on top of that. Fun. It's really a pretty good way to learn the Cascade, because you can just figure out how that specificity works, and in every particular case, what I want to do to just target the specific right thing that I'm looking for. By Flukeout, very, very fun. I believe it's flukeout.github.io. But CSS Diner as a Google search will work for you. If you're talking about Flexbox, the thing that I didn't spend quite enough time on, the same guy that did, no, this is not the same guy that did Flukeout, I'm sorry. But Flexbox Froggy is another situation where I've got this layout game where I've got different lily pads, I've got different frogs, and then I basically just write CSS in order to get those frogs onto the right lily pads. It's kind of fun, and again, it's immediate response, because you can just do that thing and try it, and then it doesn't work, and not only can you see it not working, you can see the visual representation of how it doesn't work, and just keep hitting those targets. That's Flexbox Froggy, but then there's also Grid Garden, also by Thomas H. Park. There's another one that's more complicated, that is like proper like video game graphics, like looks like an Xbox thing, but that's like $100. But the Grid Garden's very cool. Now you have a situation where I just have these carrots. I want to water these carrots, and most of these are like 24 levels. Just get that thing. You can basically get there in like an hour, and probably figure out a lot of fundamental concepts. CodePen's just a fun place to go as a front end person, and I didn't even have a bookmark here simply because like the picked pens are just fun to look at. Now, CodePen, of course, not just for CSS. It's an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript thing, but it's just fun to see like what people. Whoa, there we go. Yeah. Also, if you really want to absolutely torture yourself, because sometimes I do, I got into this. I don't even recommend this. This is an addiction now. So what you have is, first of all, you need to create the image. I don't know if I'm not logged in on this browser. But first you create the image that you're trying to create here. And you need to create it with 100% accuracy. Any sort of like 1 pixel off thing is going to throw the thing out. So you need to get that pixel to accuracy, and then you need to make it as small as possible, because what it's trying to do is it first does by accuracy and then it does by character count, which means that you immediately start writing horrible CSS, like really non-compliant, like I'm gonna start a div and not break it, I'm gonna open a style tag, everything's an ID because class is more letters than ID. Like, it's super fun as a way to just get a lot of pleasure out of writing really mercilessly awful CSS. So I'm hoping at the end of this, we went from here and we can think about CSS slightly differently. I know we only had a little bit about an hour together, but I'm hoping that some of these perspectives I'm hoping that some of those perspectives stick with you and give you things to grow on. All the CSS GIFs are by Lynn Fisher, who is really great. My name is Lemon. Two things I want to leave you with briefly. The first is that I know that we all like stickers. I got stickers for you if you're interested. When you get to the back, if you feel like putting one of those cards in the box to say what you thought of this talk, you can go ahead and do that. The one thing that I will tell you is that the red ones and the yellow ones are poison. Whether or not you choose to act on that information is entirely up to you. Again, thank you very much. And enjoy NDC.